Welcome everyone back to weekly weather updates, and in today's video we have the latest from the live radar, run for the latest UKV, have a look at the precipitation and the temperature over the next 5 days as we are going to end October and start November on a very unsettled note as we continue to see westerly winds piling in off the Atlantic, lots of lower pressure and potentially even see the remnants of Hurricane Melissa. Of course, we're not going to see anywhere near the impacts that has been seen out in the Caribbean. It is going to be a standard low by the time it gets here, but nonetheless it could draw some very warm air and contribute to the unsettled conditions into early next week. As we look at the longer range, we continue to see this pattern develop throughout the next week to 10 days. Beyond that, some uncertainty starting to appear, perhaps a bit of Atlantic ridging, maybe some northern blocking starting to appear as we progress towards the middle of November. But it is speculative at this stage. It is in line with our expectations as we head further into November, but at the moment not seeing any concrete signals, just a few hints at this stage, and that's something we're going to continue to monitor, especially over the coming days. And of course we'll look at that in more detail in the second half of the video. So do remember, if you enjoy videos, make sure to like and subscribe. Now if you start on the live radar, you can see a lot of heavy rain moving through this evening. We're recording this just before 8 PM on Thursday, so one more day left of October, Halloween of course tomorrow, and it does look like it is going to be a pretty wet one in places. There could be some areas that do avoid that rain, but there are going to be some quite hefty showers around during the afternoon, and then later on in the evening we start to see a more succinct and pretty severe low moving in from the southwest, gusty winds and heavy rain. But for most, apart from the far south and west, it shouldn't really give too many impacts until the early hours of Saturday. So you can see lots of rain around at the moment. This is going to sweep through quite swiftly overnight tonight, and it is just again in this Atlantic flow that does continue. Temperatures are relatively mild further westwards, a little bit cooler further eastwards. Again, we're oscillating between slightly milder and slightly cooler air masses, but generally hovering around that average mark for the time of year. Now, if you look at the latest UKV, you can see all of that rain moving in from the west at the moment. It moves through quite quickly overnight tonight and then clears into the early hours of Halloween. Now, initially, it doesn't look too bad early on in the day, but then we start to see these hefty showers arriving from the west and southwest that could give some quite heavy and torrential periods of rain for short periods of time, but still could be disruptive in some spots. Not looking great as that clears through. A lot of those showers should clear by sunset, 5-6 PM, but there will still be a few that do linger. Later on in the evening though, look out to the southwest, we start to see a more succinct area of low pressure arrive, which brings further torrential rainfall and most likely some hefty gusts as well that could again produce some pretty stormy conditions in places. Because see, for most, those really horrible conditions don't really arrive until the early hours of Saturday and clear into Saturday morning. Now into the first day of November, by the afternoon, it doesn't look too bad, but it's a typical autumnal pattern with showers around and bits and bobs of sunshine, but nothing too great. Into Sunday, another spell of rain moves through in the morning, that clears, and by the afternoon doesn't look too bad, but another spell of rain moving in from the west into the early hours of Monday, and then Monday it starts on a relatively wet note in the north and west, drier in the south and east, but that rain will eventually sweep through on Monday afternoon, and then into Tuesday it looks pretty horrific there into the early hours of the morning, with that rain clearing through into the afternoon and just generally looks really not great at all. But by the afternoon of Tuesday we should eventually see that clear and a bit of sunshine finally coming through. Now, if you look at the wind gusts, we are going to see some gusty winds over the coming days. We've got some quite strong winds around at the moment with this weather front moving through, but they should start to ease over the next few hours. With that, a lively low pressure system approaching from the southwest during Friday evening, Halloween there, we could again see gusts up to 50, maybe 60 or 70 out towards the Irish Sea, but again, should clear through into the early hours of Saturday. Beyond that, we continue to see gusty periods of winds, but again, nothing too crazy. Maybe some further warnings issued, but at this stage, again, we're not looking at anything too notable. If we look at the max temperatures you see this afternoon, not too bad. Again, hovering around average in most spots, high single digits or low teens. Into Halloween, it's actually going to be a relatively mild Halloween for most, 16 or 17 degrees before that low pressure system arrives. So we are in a warm sector of Halloween, so it is going to be fairly mild out there, which is of course pretty good if you have got plans. Beyond that, as we head into Saturday, it is going to turn a little bit fresher from the west, where temperatures are more in the single digits, but maybe still 12 to 14 degrees in the east. Progressively into Sunday, again, temperatures could hover around the 8 to 11 degree mark, again around average. Monday jumps up a little bit, 15 or 16, and then into Tuesday, still mild in the east, maybe even 16 or 17, but you can see it's much cooler in the north and west with fresher air masses moving in. It's quite up and down over the next few days. Generally, southern and eastern areas are probably a little bit milder than average, northern and western areas are probably a little bit cooler, but overall, we're not too far away from where we should be this time of year. Now, if you head over to the latest GFS, you see the Atlantic conditions continue over the coming days. And if you see this quite severe low just on the left of the screen coming out of the North Atlantic, that is Hurricane Melissa. That is going to bring still pretty lively conditions across the North Atlantic. But you can see it just kind of gets absorbed into the main flow and remnants hit our shores later on next week. Nothing too severe at all. You can see beyond that, we do start to see a bit of Atlantic ridging, which could allow some slight northerly winds to arrive for a time. And right towards the end of this run, we actually have a bit of a block starting to develop towards Greenland. But actually, with its positioning here, we're actually drawing up some quite mild air there for the middle portion of November. But I wouldn't be surprised if that shifts. What we're really looking at this stage is that more disturbed, amplified pattern, which is what will cause intrigue. As I said, it could set up slightly differently. And if that does occur, then yes, that cold air to our northeast could head our way. Now, if we do look into the next few days, you can see some relatively mild air could be drawn up by Melissa, when generally in air masses, we're kind of hovering in and around average over the foreseeable future. Now, if you compare to the GM, again, very similar, with very unsettled conditions continuing into next week. And again, towards day 10, we do start to see some further Atlantic ridging, maybe some northern blocking starting to appear because the Atlantic is nowhere near as flat and westerly, more amplification occurring, which again could allow colder, maybe even drier patterns to develop. But at this stage, as I said, it is still hints, no concrete information. This is definitely going to occur. We'll have to give it, again, another few days at least until we'll be able to come to any major conclusions. And even then, knowing the models, they'll still probably be in some sort of disagreement. If you look at the latest ECMWF, again, lots of low pressure coming in off the Atlantic, looking really unsettled as we head into next week. And then again, as we progress later on next week, we do start to again see some amplification in the jet stream. Bit of a northerly flow starting to develop at day 10. And if we do go into the subsequent days, it stays unsettled and a bit of a Scandinavian high starts to develop with easterly winds, which would be interesting there. So you can see definitely a shift longer range, perhaps something more blocked and more abnormal there towards the middle of November. Again, that is fairly in line with our expectations from our latest winter look ahead. Do check that out. We released that earlier this week on Tuesday, as again, that has some really interesting signals for the start of winter and even stretching into November. So I'm not surprised to see perhaps more cold and blocked type patterns developing, but we've got no agreement. They're hints, they're just ideas starting to get floated within the model output. We'll have to wait again another good few days, maybe even a couple of weeks before we have any further sort of concrete information on this pattern. Now, if you finish by looking at the latest ensembles, you can see the latest GFS ensemble is a little bit all over the place. Again, pretty in line with expectations, with an Atlantic flow, some cooler and warmer sectors, but generally around average, maybe above average there. Lots of precipitation spikes, again, clustering at points. That's when we could see some more vicious lows moving through, like we have as we head into Saturday morning, and like we do have in around a week's time, where we've got some big precipitation spikes starting to appear. But as I said, just generally an unsettled spell. Typical kind of autumnal patterns. When you think of autumn, you think of these windy and unsettled days, lots of cloud, lots of gloom. That's exactly what we're going to see over the next week to 10 days. Longer range, perhaps drier and colder, but you see not too much of a big signal here from the latest GFS ensembles. And then finally, if we compare to the latest ECMWF, it's very, very similar. Not too much dispersion, actually. Lots of average or even above average air masses there to the first week of November. And again, plenty of precipitation spikes. So again, no real differences from the ensemble today, continuing that really unsettled spell. It is going to be interesting to watch the operational runs where we do start to see some concrete hints longer range, some consistency between the runs. But one thing I can say is we are definitely starting to see a bit of a shift appearing for the middle of November. What the shift will be, exactly what sort of pattern does develop, it's way too early to say with any definitive answer. But definitely the runs today are suggesting it could have to do with more amplified jet stream and maybe some more northern blocking patterns. And as I said, that is in line with our expectations as we progress later on into November. So anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Make sure you have a great Halloween. Doesn't look too bad out there if you're around the early evening, if you avoid those showers, but through the early afternoon and of course later on in the night, it is going to be pretty horrible. So do mind that and keep an eye on the live radars. The showers are looking pretty squally, so it will come and go quickly, but they could give you a real soaking if you get caught out in there. So thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you again from the video soon.